I am very excited to sit here today and listen to and learn from and ask questions of our special guest, Lieutenant Charles Crosby. A little bit more about Lieutenant Crosby. He has been with the Orlando Police Department for 19 years. He has 15 years experience as a crisis negotiator and trainer. And you'll hear about some of that experience here in just a few minutes. He is also the founding member and owner of a company called Communication Synergy. That's Synergy with a C, Cynergy, which you could find on LinkedIn, Facebook. And through that company, he offers training and for negotiation and leadership. And I would highly encourage you to look him up. I've heard Lieutenant Crosby speak before, but today I get to be a co-presenter with him where he's going to do most of the work. I'm, again, very excited and turn it over to Lieutenant Crosby.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here, Eric. Thank you very much for having me. I look forward to offering you some of the insight that we've gained over the years in terms of what we do as crisis negotiators, and hope that you'll find it useful for what you do in your own personal practices. So without too much ado, let's go ahead and get started. Kind of give you a little bit insight into some of the things that crisis negotiators deal with.
Emergency 911, this is Oscar Lines being recorded. What?
I want to let you know I'm in Orlando, and I did the shooting.
What's your name?
My name is, I pledge of allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi of the Islamic State.
Okay. What's your name?
I pledge my allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, Hafidullah, on behalf of the Islamic State.
Where are you at?
In Orlando.
Where in Orlando?
So in terms of what crisis negotiation involves, we don't often get an opportunity to choose the settings we walk into. That was the 911 call made by the terrorist who attacked the attendees at the Pulse nightclub on June 12th, 2016. And that 911 call came in about 30 minutes into the incident. Prior to that, we had no direct contact with the subject. And that call was listened to by two crisis negotiators who then made phone calls into him and attempted to start a dialogue. And one of the things that anytime we have people take a look at what crisis negotiators do, that question often arises is, how do we get this conversation started? Right. So if you're thinking about this, sitting at your desk, at your computer, wherever you're doing, what is it that you would say to start that conversation? You're going to call in and you're going to talk to this person who just claimed responsibility for 49 dead and 58 injured as a result of a mass shooting. What's your plan? How are you going to address that topic? And to be honest, it can be quite overwhelming. So we've developed, we crisis negotiators have developed strategies to kind of help us ease into that situation. And I'm going to kind of give you a basic overview of what that looks like as far as the strategies that we use.
And this is excellent stuff, because one thing that I noticed right away that's different between this situation that you've presented and what we do as lawyers or as a mediator in our professional practice, or even as for businesses in negotiation, is we often have an opportunity to prepare in advance. We know the facts, we know the background, and we can go into a negotiation prepared, where with something like this, you're just getting hit with a call. You're not picking the scene, you're not picking the time. How much of a difference, and I guess you'll get into this throughout the seminar, I think we're going to learn things that we can do to help us better in our preparation to make us ready to hit the ground running whenever something like this happens.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. We do prepare, but our preparation looks a little bit different. When we talk about preparation, we prepare for how we're going to adapt to the unique circumstances that we're about to face. So, we often, I don't want to present this as if it's not a two-sided negotiation with a mediator in the middle. It absolutely is. On the one side, we have the police department and the city or county government, where there's very clearly law that's on our side that says this person needs to do what I say. And that's the expectation of law enforcement and of city officials, county officials, federal officials, whoever it is. And on the other side, you have the lawbreaker. And the crisis negotiator often has to play the mediator between those two. Is we understand, we probably as members of the government side probably understand their needs and demands a little bit more than we do the other side. But in order to find that common ground and get to a peaceful resolution, we have to be able to explore the needs and wants of both sides and understand where they can come together.
Excellent.
All right. So there's a lot of different ways to break down the skills that crisis negotiators use. There's several models out there. If you were to talk to crisis negotiation experts across the field, you get a bunch of different answers about how you can approach this. I don't want to present this as a model, but rather as a collection of concepts that we can use because I think it's easier to translate what we're doing to a broader context than it is to narrow it down to an actual crisis negotiation setting. So those basic skills that we use, and they're on the screen in the order that we'll kind of address them, is we're going to make an effort to discover what's going on with the individual that's involved in this situation. We're going to endeavor to connect with them, and connect. It can look in a variety of different ways. And then our final goal is to influence them to make a different decision, different choices that will help us to peacefully resolve the incident. So to kind of put a picture in your head of what this looks like, that discover process is getting them to open the door in the first place. Right. And that connection is the conversation that occurs through the threshold with an individual on each side, the conversation that continues, and that influence in the multitude of the ways that situations can end. Influence can look like them coming out the door, can look like them allowing us to come in the door. It can, I mean, you can think of it from a sales perspective. It's them agreeing to buy what we're selling, whatever that last opportunity for influence is. So those are the three kind of core skills that we're going to talk about.
And I'm looking forward to seeing how you develop each skill and figure out when the timing is right and how to move from one to the next.
All right. So let's start with discover. And I love this concept of discover, this word of discover, because when I think of discovery, I think of, and it's probably, I have a history background. I think of, the discovery of the New World. Take all the politics aside from it, but the basic concept is that when we quote unquote discovered the New World, it already existed, right? It was already there. In fact, it was already very lived in. But the discovery of the New World brought new information to light that wasn't known before. Same thing if you want to look at it from a science perspective, right? Marie Curie worked very hard in the field of radioactivity, first person to win 2 Nobel Prizes, first person to win in separate fields. So she and her husband, they discover radioactivity in general, they win a Nobel Prize in physics, and then years later, she identifies radon and polonium. And so she wins a Nobel Prize in chemistry for that. These things existed already, right? She just found them. She found a new way to look at them and to describe them in a way that makes sense to the world. And so a lot of times we as crisis negotiators are doing during that first initial process is we're really looking to find out what's already there and be able to express that in a way that makes sense to everybody else who's witnessing what's happening. And the way that we do that is through kind of these combination of basics. These are 3 of many different components that could be enlisted to assist in this discovery process. But those 3 components that we'll talk about today are use of active listening skills, the employment and understanding of what empathy means and how we use it, and then the kind of general broad concept that has been labeled emotional intelligence. So active listening skills, they come in a variety of different fashions. I'll focus on 4 core ones. They tend to be probably the most bang for your buck, in my opinion, just my opinion. And those would be kind of the opportunity to paraphrase what's being said, And what that does is that demonstrates for the individual that you're talking to that you're paying attention and attempting to make sure that you get what they're saying correctly. And you do that by giving it back to them and letting them review your interpretation to make sure that it's correct. We have open-ended questions. That a lot of times that's simply defined as questions that require more than a yes or no answer, or maybe questions that require more than one word answer. I prefer to think of them as questions that I don't know the answer to, right? We don't like to ask questions that we don't already know the answer to most of the time, but in order to understand someone else's perspective and how they see the world, sometimes I have to ask questions that I don't know the answer to give people an opportunity to explain the trajectory that they're on, where they came from and where they think they're headed to, so that I can reorient myself to align with the way they see the world. Third skill to talk about is this mirroring and reflecting. Chris Voss loves this one. If you've seen his mastermind, I'm sorry, what's that?
It's a Masterworks or
Masterclass. Chris Voss loves loves mirroring and reflecting in his masterclass. It's just repeating back that last couple words of what was said and then stopping, because that through that repetition, we give the person an opportunity to continue talking on whatever path that they were talking. It's just an acknowledgement that says, I think there's more that you have to say, and rather than interrupt you, I'm going to let you know it's okay for you to continue. I'm still here and I'm still paying attention. And then finally is this concept of emotion labeling. And emotion labeling, it serves a couple different purposes. One, the emotions come from an older portion of the brain, the human brain, than our ability to verbalize those emotions. And so sometimes in our heads, there's a little bit of a disconnect from what we're feeling and our ability to articulate it. So when somebody throws it back at us and says, and it sounds like you are expressing frustration. Oh, okay, yes, that's a good way to describe how I'm feeling. And in making that connection, we can alleviate some of the frustration that comes with not being able to articulate it. That emotion labeling also gives an opportunity to make sure that we understand how people are perceiving the situation, to make sure we're on the right track. Now, when we do emotion labeling, the object isn't to get it right. I mean, we're going to try, right? But when we get it wrong, the best part about emotion labeling is usually people will correct you. I mean, you sound frustrated. I'm not frustrated. I'm angry. Okay, now I have a better understanding as a negotiator of where you're coming from and how I might need to deal with this process to diffuse some of that really strong emotion, because strong emotion tends to get in the way of rational decision-making, good, sound, solid decision-making. The next component, that empathy component, a lot of people like to use the analogy, you got to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. And I think that's a great picture to paint. I just throw a little bit of caution at that, right? Is walking a mile in somebody else's shoes tells you how you feel in their shoes. It doesn't tell you how they feel walking in those shoes. So when we think about empathy, we really need to pay a little more attention to trying to understand. Again, it's that open-ended question. I don't know what this is like. Even if I've gone through a similar situation before, the factors that influenced me to put me in a situation, say somebody's going through a divorce and they're suicidal, right? If I've gone through a divorce before, I can bond over that. We have a similar experience, but that doesn't mean our feelings are the same. So empathy really means trying to get in touch with the person's understanding of their situation, not how you would view it, right? And sometimes that means just sitting with them. In this picture here on the slide, this is Kevin Briggs. He's the California Highway Patrol, former retired California Highway Patrol officer that's on the bridge, and he's talking to Kevin Berthia, who he spoke to for 90 minutes on that day. And this was a successful negotiation. He was able to convince Mr. Berthia to step back over the rail. They now travel. As a result of Trooper Briggs's work, Mr. Berthia was able to get some help, diagnosed with mental illness, get some corrective medication, and he now travels and speaks about his experiences. And Mr. Briggs wrote a wonderful book, Guardians of the Golden Gate, and he talks about the hundreds of negotiations that he had to conduct on the expanse of the Golden Gate Bridge, and how the value of simply listening to understand. I think that's Stephen Covey, right? Listen to understand, not to reply. Listening to understand, giving people an opportunity to express their story without judgment. That is the most critical skill in resolving these types of incidents. And then I'll finally, just real quick, I don't want to get into emotional intelligence. That's a whole chapter all of it on its own. But the component of emotional intelligence that's relevant to how we discover what's going on is really kind of moderating the negotiator's own feelings and emotions that are going on, and recognizing how the subject's feelings and emotions are impacting the conversation and trying to guide that in a more productive direction.
So two things I noticed right away. Many questions I have, but I know we have more material. But one is your tone of voice and inflection and the way you're speaking, just in delivering. I would imagine that has some importance when you're talking to people in negotiations, especially in the discovery phase, but all throughout the negotiation. So that's one question, is how important and how do you work on that skill if it is important, and with people that you train? And the second is, for something like just active listening, what type of are there exercises that you recommend as a trainer that people can do to make themselves better in active listening?
So in order to do both of those, it really involves some intent. So I'm gonna do them in the opposite order, and you're probably gonna have to remind me what the first question was, because active listening skills is in my head. One of the funny exercises, or it's useful and also somewhat entertaining, is I tell all of my students, all of my trainees, whoever's in a classroom, whoever's listening, the best way you can assess how effective you are as an active listener is to go to a family member, spouse, significant other, whatever the case is, somebody who knows you really well, ask them questions and keep them talking as long as you possibly can before they look at you and go, "You're doing that thing, aren't you? You're doing that thing. I know what you're doing." The key to active listening skills is being able to effectively switch between them. If you think about it, if all I do are ask you open-ended questions all day long, you're going to feel like you're being interrogated, right? So for me, just to ask questions and let you answer them, that's going to end a conversation relatively quickly. So I have to be able to find different ways to keep you talking, right? So some of the ways that we do that are to throw in those emotional labels. Oh my gosh, that sounds so frustrating, right? It's a natural conversation piece, but it gives them an opportunity to shift that conversation in the direction they want to go and continue it going. So we switch back and forth between those active listening skills. So if you want to practice at home, or if you want to practice at all, the best thing you can do is grab somebody who knows you really well, ask them about something that happened, and see how long you can keep them talking before you run out of things to say and they run out of things to say. I think, what was the second one you asked?
Voice and voice inflection and tone of voice.
So I think a wonderful study, I think it was out of UCLA, Albert Moravian years ago, says 55% of what you say is conveyed through your body language, 38% is conveyed through your tone of voice, and only 7% is the words that you actually use. When we put this in a classroom on a board, I have my students, I'll go around the classroom, I'll have them read. It's a simple 7-word sentence. It says, "I never said you stole her money," right? And depending on which word you emphasize, that changes the entire meaning of the sentence. I never said you stole her money. 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 I never said you stole her money, right? We understand just from listening to that sentence, those same 7 words inflected in different ways change the meaning of what's going on. And once you really kind of dig deep into that notion, it can really change the way you perceive the things that you're saying. You tend to watch a little bit more how people receive information, and you know when things just didn't land the way you think they were supposed to land, right? I think most of us have probably sent a text message and you're like, "Oh, that response, that was not right." And you go back and you read your text message, like, "Oh, okay, I understand why that was misunderstood. That wasn't what I meant." And you got to send or emails the same thing, follow-up email. "Let me clarify my last email." Same concept, right? We lose that ability to inflect in our text messages and our emails, and we lose a lot of meaning in that. So it's critical as we go through our scenario-based training and our practice that we point out those things when we hear them in our future negotiators, and we give them an opportunity to reflect upon that and see how they would change the way they're saying things to be more effective.
Excellent. As we're flipping to the next slide, I'll just add an anecdote on the active listening, especially for the lawyers and other professionals who are on listening and go to social events. I have had some fun using some active listening skills, particularly the mirroring and the labeling at social events, just for an hour, hour and a half, to see how long I could keep other people talking and just practice those skills. And it doesn't offend anyone. It may feel a little unnatural, but it seems to me to be a great practice environment.
And I think you hit it head on. It does feel unnatural, but most of the time, if you're doing it even moderately well, it feels unnatural for you, but maybe not so much for the person who's listening to it, because what you're doing is you're showing or reflecting a genuine interest in the story that they're telling, and you're asking for more. And people love to talk about what they know about. And so that's tends to be pretty effective. So we transition, and sometimes it's a little bit like sticking your toe in the pool to test the waters. When we feel like we've gone through a process of discovery and we're ready to transition to this process of connecting, you do a little dabbling, right? Is it my turn to talk? Do I have a chance to share some of my experiences? And in a crisis negotiation, you'll know right away whether or not you have expressed enough interest. The quote from John Maxwell is, you have to touch a heart before you ask for a hand. In crisis negotiation, you have to really demonstrate a genuine interest in the person that you're talking to before you can even start to ask them to do things to help you or help the government who's on the other side, right? To meet in the middle somewhere. I can't ask you to move until you believe I have your best interests at heart. So that's that discovery process. Then we get to the connection process. We'll dip our toe in the pool, see how the water is, throw out a couple little personal stories, and try to get there. But kind of the bridge is the identifying the values behind the stories that people tell. Depending on the type of crisis incident you have. The picture here is a bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden in 1973. This is where the phrase Stockholm syndrome comes from. And one of the interesting things about this is that it was highly covered in the media. And when speaking with the hostages after this incident, they connected better with the hostage takers than they did with the police who were trying to save their lives. And it was that connection that actually led them to defend the actions of the hostage takers and really criticize the police after this incident. And it shows the importance of treating people like human beings, at least at the personal level, even if the greater environmental context doesn't necessarily demonstrate that, that personal connection is really important. And so we as crisis negotiators, we always have to realize that the context that we're operating in is one where there's a lot of guns, generally speaking, pointed in the general direction of the person that we're on the other end of the phone with, right? We don't want bad things to happen to other people. And as long as bad things aren't happening, we're going to talk to them with the full knowledge that things could change fairly rapidly. But the negotiator's job is to connect with them on that personal level, despite that environmental context. So the negotiation in Stockholm was kind of one of those examples of the hostage takers were really more effective at bonding with hostages than the police were at demonstrating their genuine concern for the hostages. Now, I have to throw a caveat, and I'll just touch on it briefly, but because we're focusing on connection, that's the point that I'm making. Crisis negotiation also recognizes that the person we're trying to connect with is the hostage taker, not the hostage. The hostage taker is the one that's responsible for the lives inside. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing that they bond with the hostages, because it means that they help keep them safe, which is our ultimate objective. But it just kind of demonstrates the importance of connecting with people on a personal level. So how do we as crisis negotiators work through that connection? Well, sometimes during that discovery process, what we get is a story, right? These are the ways that I believe I've been wronged. These are the things that I'm trying to accomplish overall. And what we try to do, and one of the things that helps us to bring things into a kind of a bigger picture, a lot of that conversation is focused on the past, right? These are the things that have gotten me to this point. None of those things are changeable. So from the stories that we're hearing, we'll try to draw out the values that underlie those stories. So you feel like you weren't treated fairly. You feel like you weren't given proper value and worth as a human being based on your position or who you are, the things you accomplish, right? Your status wasn't exactly acknowledged. You feel like you lost a part of a relationship that was critical to your overall well-being, right? We want to bring out those values and identify those in the discovery phase. And then when we get to the connect phase, I'm going to use those and emphasize those values as a way to connect with my subject that's in crisis or that I'm talking to. So for example, I value fairness as well, right? I think things should be fair. And clearly from your situation, you don't think those things have been fair. And I can see that. I can see how the things that you've gone through would present a picture of unfairness to you. I totally get that. So I'm going to try to help you figure out a way to make it look a little more fair, right? So we're looking for those underlying values because those are things I can work with in the present and in the future rather than focusing on the past. Second is we're going to try to find some common ground. What are some of the things that we have in common? Like I said, we can reflect on if you're feeling suicidal, you're going to jump off a bridge because you lost your relationship, you're going through a divorce, or you're likely to go through a divorce, things are turned sour. And I've gone through that before. We do have some common ground. These gives us an opportunity to exchange stories. And we have to be very cognizant. It's not a one-upsmanship, right? Their story is always more important. It's always bigger, it's always better, and it's always more important. Right? But it is an opportunity to share something with them. And we tend to gravitate towards people that we have things in common with. That research by Bob Cialdini is pretty clear on that. We tend to gravitate towards people who are like us. And so the more things we can find that we share with the person on the other end of the telephone or on the other end of the negotiation, the more likely they are to be receptive to our attempts to work through things. And that final bullet point there, stay interested and interesting, right? It's just a reminder. Hey, just because we're trying to transition from the discovery portion of this negotiation to the connecting doesn't mean that we give up on discovery, right? We still have to be invested in the things that they're saying and make sure we understand, right? So we're looking for multiple paths towards connection so that in the event that one falters, right? I went to step on this stepping stone over here and found out it's a little more quicksand underneath that stepping stone than I expected. I can step back, but I still have another direction to go. And so we're trying to build multiple avenues for approaching this, what's ultimately going to be an attempt at a resolution of some sort.
So I would imagine that in these situations, most people, including folks who are well trained, have times when they lack for something to say or can't think of something or they're stumped. And in your last point, stay interested and interesting. And we talked about this a little bit the other day. What types, can you give some tips for our viewers on ways you can prepare for when that happens, for when you don't know what to say?
Yeah, I think probably the best thing that we have an opportunity to do, at least as far as we're going from crisis negotiators, is we can always offer a break, right? We can always offer a break. We've gotten to a point, there's something that's going on in our background. Maybe we should take a time out. We should reconvene in 10 or 15 minutes, give an opportunity, or somebody from my team is bringing additional information, from my command staff, what they want. I need a minute. We'll take a break. And then we have an opportunity to collaborate with team members. No one negotiator is capable of conducting a crisis negotiation by themselves. There's a whole team of people behind them that help them through the preparation process and that help them when they get stuck. But again, the biggest part of that is when you get stuck, you can never really go wrong falling back on kind of a summary of where we are, where we got to, and a re-emphasis of things that are going on, and see if the individual wants to add to that, if we're missing anything that's key or critical to what they're seeing.
Now, we also, one thing we talked about the other day, I thought was pretty cool, was you talked about bunches of fives and preparing for, and also this idea of having multiple folks who are trained in negotiation, I suppose, listening on calls, and providing input. Can you give our audience some insight on what the bunches of fives are?
Yeah, bunches of five comes from the United Kingdom and their negotiation tactics. And basically what that says is in every crisis negotiation, there are pretty much some things that are going to be very predictable, right? We know that when we get on the phone with the person, they're going to ask that we bring the tactical team back up, everybody back up, right? They're going to tell the negotiator, go away. And so one of the advantages that we have is since we know these things are going to come up, we can prepare for them ahead of time. So I'll have a group of my team of negotiators will sit down before we make the phone call, ideally, and we say, okay, what are we going to say? What are some options that we have to say for when this person says, back up, right? Get your teams to back up, right? And what that does is it gives us a range of things to say rather than just fall back on the standard, I can't, right? So if you have a team of people coming up with solutions, it might come up with something like, hey, we're here to keep you safe. They're stopping people from coming into the scene. You're dealing with me, and they're just trying to keep everybody else out of the way so that we don't get interrupted. There's three right there, and I can pre-prepare these. That way, when they do say this and they repeat it throughout a negotiation, I don't just have a rote, canned response. I'm prepared to address these things and demonstrate that I'm genuinely concerned about this person's safety. Right. And I can rotate through them. It's not just repeating the same thing over and over again.
And I think this is great advice for folks going into a negotiation or going into a mediation to be able to think about some of the things you know that the other side is going to say, or what are some common rebuttals or common statements that you expect to hear, and preparing ahead of time for that. So it just seems to me to be a great tip. So thank you.
Yeah. So if we've gotten to the point where we have a connection, and usually, I mean, you don't want to put numbers on it because people tend to get fixated on numbers, and I don't want that to happen. But when you get to a point in a negotiation where conversation is actually happening, it's not one way. I'm not sitting there listening the entire time and the subject is the one doing all the talking. I actually have an opportunity to engage in dialogue. I share some of my experiences. I share some of my insight. And maybe the conversation itself is transitioning a little bit more heavily on the negotiator side. What we start to do is we start to focus on how we're going to utilize the influence that we've gained through our connection to get to some sort of resolution, whatever that looks like. Some may recognize the picture there on the screen. That is the second Boston Marathon bomber from 2013. What you may or may not know is when he was cornered in a boat in a backyard in a house up there just outside of Boston, the first thing the police did when they found him was they shot at him. And then they absolutely lobbed just a catatonic amount of chemical agent into the boat. And then the last thing they did was negotiate with him. And after negotiation, he came out, right? He surrendered. And that just goes to show that no matter how bad the situation looks from the very beginning, and no matter how much damage we think has already been done, there's always a potential for resolution toward the end, or towards the end, where there's always potential for positive, peaceful resolution. So when we talk about influence, again, I'll fall back really quickly on John Maxwell. John Maxwell defines leadership as influence, nothing more, nothing less, right? So when we talk about influence, basically what we're talking about is the ability to direct a person in along the path that gets us to resolution. And there are a couple things we try to keep in mind as we're doing that. The first is that we don't define the path. It is the best thing we can hope for as negotiators is that there are several different ways to accomplish a peaceful resolution. And in identifying those ways, there may be one we prefer that doesn't work for the individual. So we can work with them and give them some sort of control or some sort of input into the resolution process. And that's feeding that idea of autonomy. Autonomy serves a couple different purposes. Autonomy gives us an opportunity to feel valued, which is something we've been trying to accomplish as negotiators throughout the negotiation. And it gives the subject an opportunity to feel valued, to contribute to the overall resolution. And again, we'll go back to Bob Cialdini. What we get is this principle of commitment and consistency. And if I have an opportunity to commit to something, participate in that feedback process, I'm invested in it and I want to see it succeed. So when we give our subjects an opportunity to give feedback or input onto how we're going to resolve this situation peacefully, we, by association, get their buy-in as well. And so I think that having those options and being able to present as many options as possible, whether that's 2 or 6, 7, 8, I think it's very valuable. Now, I may differ a little bit from our tactical team. There's definitely going to be one option that is their preference. It is the safest as the way they see it, and they don't want any deviations from that because uncertainty is, surprises are always bad in a crisis negotiation. But hopefully during our negotiation process, when we give them different options, we can communicate in the other direction as well. Remember, there's 2 parties in this, so we can communicate to our command staff, to the city leaders, whoever the case is, whoever's on the other side, and say, we need to do this because in order to get peaceful resolution, this is the option that they're going to be committed to seeing succeed. How do we do this? How do we buy it? Well, we do a lot of it through our experience. And when I say our experience, I don't mean the negotiator that's on the phone. I mean the collective experience of the negotiation community, right? I have my experience as a negotiator on the phone with people in crisis. I have my team members' experience and the things that they've learned from the situations they've gone through with people in crisis. I have the greater Orlando community and the teams from other agencies that they've gone through and the things that they've shared with us and the stories and things that they've encountered. I have the state of Florida and a Florida Association of Hostage Negotiators. We have the National Crisis Negotiator Association and those associated groups from different states across the nation. We all share our experiences so that we have a broader understanding of the work that has been done, what has been successful, what has been less successful, and how we can do things better moving forward. And bottom line, when it comes to influence, is change is their choice. It always is going to be, right? In order to get to a resolution, both sides have to be willing to accept that. If I'm talking to somebody who's holding hostages in a bank and he says, I will come out if the government does this, and the government says, I'm not doing that, that doesn't help me get to a resolution. Same thing is government says, I need this, and I go to the subject inside the bank and say, you need to do this to get to a peaceful resolution. He says, I'm not doing that. We don't have a win here, right? Neither side is going to get the things that they want. So part of the job of a negotiator is to understand from a values perspective what we're trying to accomplish, right? What those underlying values are. From a government, the big one we sell is, hey, we want this resolved peacefully. We don't want to lose human life, regardless of what human life that is, whether it's a person in crisis, whether it's a hostage, whether it's our tactical operators. We want to keep everybody involved in the situation safe. Right? And the safest way to do that is to get this person to agree to some sort of resolution. On the other side of that is same basic principle. We don't want to cost you your life, right? We don't want that to come into play. So we're trying to find a way to make this work and to see things peacefully, while also recognizing that you have some things that you have perceived to have gone wrong, and we need to get help in addressing those. Whether I'm the one that needs to help you, whether I know someone else who can help you, those are the things that I'm going to look for, right? So we look at always keeping in the back of our minds that change ultimately is their choice. And sometimes they choose not. And that's a hard thing for a lot of negotiators, but it is a reality of what we do, is they choose not to change, and that situation is not going to resolve itself in a successful outcome, or a successful outcome as we deserve it, a peaceful outcome.
If the folks listening to this, lawyers, mediators, think about it, this is really, from the outside, from a bargaining perspective, seems like a very one-sided negotiation. And I know you've got a really cool slide and video to share, so I don't want to take I'm going to save the next question for the end and allow others to ask a question. But I do want to come back and touch on the psychology of loss aversion versus rewards when we're talking about how to resolve these and through influence. But you could touch on it a bit, or move on to the next slide.
Yeah, we'll get that to the end. So what I have here is just a very quick couple of snippets to kind of try to show you what it looks like before we work on discovering what's going on. what happens when we actually invest in discovery and look for connection, and then how that connection can lead to influence. So here's what it looks like before we make an attempt to discover what's going on.
Hey, Lynn.
I don't think OFD has
Lynn,
that kind of stuff.
is it okay if I walk right here so I can talk to you? Okay. My name's Taylor. And I talked to your husband a little bit. He let me know what's going on, but can you tell me what's going on? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I can't hear you. You said something about a good person?
I'm not a good person.
Well, I don't know about that. Why would you say something like that? What's going on that makes you feel that way?
We can relay to OFD to
Okay.
come in. No lights and tires right now.
Okay. Is there someone else you want to talk to? Okay. Well, would you like to talk to your husband?
No.
Okay. How many kids do you have, Lynn?
Not answering you.
2?
Not answering you.
Okay. Well, how about I just talk then? You don't have to answer any questions.
So what we have there at the beginning of this negotiation, we have a young lady who's sitting on the 7th floor of a parking garage. She is expressing the desire to jump, and she's very depressed. We have an officer who was not a trained negotiator at the time. This incident helped push her into learning how to be a negotiator, who was the first one on scene, the one who attempted to make contact. And what you see is a lot of resistance right away. First thing the officer asks is, "Can I get closer?" And Lynn says no. And then the officer says, I can't really hear what you're saying, so I have to get closer. What's going on?" She says, "I'm not a good person." And the officer disagrees with her. "Oh, I don't know about that. Why would you say that?" Right? And it's almost an accusation. This is how the Lynn felt at the time, and we're not acknowledging that. And then you can tell the awkwardness of that difficult conversation kind of creeps in, and the officer says, "Well, how do I disengage from this conversation as quickly as possible? Is there anyone else that I can get to talk to you rather than me?" And she says, "No, I don't want to talk to anybody else." And then, as if that wasn't a clear enough answer, "Well, what about your husband?" And we get a definite no. And you can tell in Lynn's inflection that the husband was a definite no, and that was probably something that might have been contributing to the reason Lynn was up there. So we have an officer who's not doing, and I say this not as a criticism of what's happening, but really just a lack of awareness of what we could be doing. Not trying to find out, not giving Lynn an opportunity to tell her story, and also just kind of maybe not listening for the things that a negotiator would listen for, which are that tone and inflection, those opportunities to engage in conversation. So what happens between that cut and the next video clip is a negotiator comes up to this officer and starts coaching her in her ear. Here are some things. Here are some questions that you can ask, an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into what Lynn is going through.
Can I talk to my dad?
No, do you want me to talk to your dad? Okay, I can talk to your dad. What do you want me to say to your dad? What did you say, Lynn?
He's just sensible.
Okay. What do you think that he would say right now if he was here and could talk to you? Is this something that you've gone through before? Yeah? Has your dad been the one that's helped you get through this before? Okay. Who's been there for you before? Your mom? Okay. Where's your mom right now? Savannah? Okay. What did your mom do to help you get through this the last time? You want to talk to your mom? Okay. That's okay. What about your dad? You want to talk to him? Okay. If we call him, what do you think it is that you want to say to him? You don't know? Just the fact that it's your dad make you feel better? Yeah, I'm really close to my dad too.
Okay, close to him, but you're right.
Okay, you're building that relationship with him? That's awesome.
So one of the great things we see there is the officer went from that whole discovery part of, what do you think you'd want to say to your mom or your dad? What would you say to them if we had them on the phone? Because we don't know the answer to that question, right? She tried to connect. She switched over and says, I'm really close to my dad too. And she got rejected. Lynn says, I'm not close to my dad. And the officer just recovers right back into the discovery process. Oh, so what you're saying is you're building that relationship, right? And so we just kind of transition very seamlessly back and forth between that discovery and connect. We need permission to connect, and we need permission to influence. And we ask for that by testing the water. And if it works, we continue. And if it doesn't, then we just we step right back into that discovery process. So what we see is the negotiator making an effort to connect with Lynn. Over the time, over a few minutes, she does get a little bit closer. We get some information. One of the things Lynn asks for is a cigarette. And so we're going to engage another of Cialdini's principles, which is the idea of reciprocity. I'm absolutely going to give you a cigarette because somewhere in our primitive human brain, when you give me something, I owe you something in return. And I may not ask for something in return right away, or I might. And in this case, we do.
Lynn, I got you those cigarettes. They just brought them to me. But you promised me that you would put your legs over to the other side, remember?
Put them on here.
I want them on the other side. That was our deal. Both legs on the other side, Lynn. That was our deal. Thank you. All right. How do you want me to get these to you without you getting any extra stress? Okay. I'm going to hand them to you, and I'm going to walk backwards, okay?
I'm just here for her safety.
Here you go. Here, don't let your phone fall.
So much pain.
How can I help you with that?
I don't know.
Okay. What can I do to help you with that? Are you talking about physical pain? Because you just had a baby, didn't you? How many days has it been?
I gave birth on Wednesday.
This Wednesday? Wow. And you're already up and moving? I haven't had kids yet, so I can't imagine how that is, but...
It's easy when you're small.
Yeah? Okay. Okay. What was it like after Lillian was born?
She struggled to stay alive too.
And how's she doing now?
It's okay, I guess. Still doesn't really talk.
Okay. How did you get through it that time? But it had to be really scary. Being a first-time mom and going through all of that.
I didn't bond with her for months.
Yeah. Well, what changed that?
Her.
Yeah, what'd she do?
Her being her.
Okay. And you finally made the click, right? And now how's your bond? Yeah. That was a loud one.
Talk to my husband. He'll come down. You talk to my husband.
You'll come down if you talk to your husband? Okay. How do you want to call your husband?
My phone's dead.
Your phone's dead? Okay. You can use my phone, but will you... Yeah, you can talk to him, but you have to come down to talk to him, okay? I'm gonna walk under the shade so that the phone doesn't get wet. Let's do that.
So, and one of the greatest things that happens in that little clip is that the officer gives her an opportunity to process the things. The officer asks great questions. Talk to me about your daughter. Lynn had just given birth 5 days prior, and so she was having some arguments with her husband. She was having some depression over the health of her baby, which is what put her on the ledge there. But the officer focused on the things that were positive, and the daughter, they had some challenges also when she was born. And when the officer asks Lynn, "And how are you now?" and Lynn answers out loud, "It's good." The negotiator coach told the officer, just wait, right? Because what you see is that body language that says, "I'm thinking this through." And what we saw from that body language was the hope that since things went so poorly with the first child but ended up okay, that connection was being made in Lynn's brain, and we didn't need to impact that. And it's exactly what happened. Is once Lynn finished going through her brief crying spell, she looked at us and she came up with her own resolution. She told the officer, "I'll come down if I get a chance to call my husband." And so that's an acceptable resolution to us. You absolutely can call your husband as soon as you come down, and that's how that resolves. So it's an opportunity to see the walkthrough from that discovery phase, what happens before you work on discovery, to the discovery phase and the attempt to transition to connection, to that influence phase, which had nothing to do with us offering us a resolution, had everything with us to do with us paving a way for Lynn to come up with her own resolution.
And it's interesting that there was a period of time when it was just quiet on the video. And I feel like sometimes in negotiations or in mediations that occurs where there's just a certain period of time where parties have to come to grips themselves with the solution. Is that pretty common in these types of scenarios where it's just once you go through the steps, but that it really just requires a certain amount of time and patience?
Yeah, sometimes you have to lay out the big picture. This is what it looks like. And if we all stood around the same table and looked at that big picture together, there's really only one way we can go, and that's towards resolution. But you can't say that. You just lay it out in front of them. You spell out the key things. You highlight what's going on, that everything points in that direction, and then you wait. And you just wait. And eventually, at some point, there's a click in there that says, this has to happen.
Yeah. Listening to you and watching the presentation today, which is incredibly valuable. Again, thank you very much for agreeing to do this. How much of the ability of the negotiator, you've trained lots of negotiators, it sounds like, how much do you think is natural? How much do people just have a natural ability to negotiate well? How much is learned and trained and based on work and effort?
So I would say that we often think of negotiators as people who are good at talking. And truth be told, negotiators are probably better people who are better at listening. Negotiators are also people who tend to be better at divergent thinking about variety of options, and then painting pictures of what those options would look like if we followed through on them. And I think from the time we're kids in school, we're trained to think a different way. We're trained to think convergently, right? There's usually one right answer. And so are there natural skills that lend themselves to negotiation? Yeah, I think there are, but the most effective negotiators are those who hone their craft through training, and they really, really work to develop the skills that they have. And it takes practice to learn to listen effectively and to influence people rather than tell them what to do.
And for folks today, for maybe top 2 or 3 takeaways from today, what type of advice would you give? What would you give advice for folks who want to get better at the craft?
The top 3 takeaways. Number 1 is seek out wherever you can any opportunity to grow your skills through education. It doesn't matter. Pick up a book, listen to a podcast, download Audible, listen to a book on the way to or from work, go to training sessions, webinars, whatever the case is. Number 2 is practice. As we were talking earlier, one of my favorite things to do to tell new negotiators is, hey, when we break for lunch for today's training day and you go to grab your coffee, I want you to, instead of asking the barista, how their day is, I want you to ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, how's your day? Right? And it's the same question. It's just worded differently, and it forces people to stop and think. And you get some weird looks. And I think part of being a negotiator is understanding that part of the conversation is going to be awkward, but you press, you genuine interest. No, how's your day? But on a scale of 1 to 10. And if they say 8, you follow up, right? What's a follow-up question? Oh, well, what makes it an 8? Right? Why is it so good? Or if it's a 3, well, okay, I don't want to focus on the bad things. So what would it take to move you from a 3 to a 5? Right? And just see if you can get people shifting their thinking in a positive direction. Let's reflect on the things that are going well. So that's number 2, educate, practice, and then 3rd is always reflect. Always reflect. It doesn't do any good to sit through trainings and read books and then not go out, put those things into practice, and then find out where we came up short. Were there environmental influences that inhibited our ability to be successful? Did I, as a negotiator and a communicator, come up just a little bit short in my effectiveness? Was my tone of voice off? Or how could I have, what are some different ways that I could have asked this for the same information from this individual that might have been more impactful?
I appreciate those tips. I just heard Chuck talk about asking people how their day is on a scale of 1 to 10 today, and I plan to apply that and try it myself. It just sounds like a great way to start a conversation and learn about people. Finally, as we get ready to close, how can people find you and find out more about you and get more information?
Yeah, the easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn right now. I had a website, but it's down for maintenance. It has been for a little bit, so we'll get that back up and running at some point, hopefully by the end of the summer. My email's there on the screen. You can also reach me there, and that's my direct cell. If you need anything, if I can help, I'm more than happy to.
All right. Thank you again. Again, if you missed an opportunity to drop a question and you have questions afterwards, if you send them to me, I'll try to get them. I'll circulate them to Lieutenant Crosby. And you also heard today several mentions, Robert Cialdini, Chris Voss. I think a lot of folks are familiar with Robert Maxwell. If you have questions about any of those, these are different books. The Cialdini book is really fascinating. It's an old book that's been redone called Influence. Great stuff. So again, thank you. I can't thank you enough for sharing your experience and skill set with us today.
Thank you.